the superior list of the top 50 fantasy books of the 21st century. Of course, this is inspired by the New York Times list, but we wanted to make our own because honestly, our list is better. We have quite a variety of fantasy books, everything from children's to adults, and all across the different fantasy subgenres. There's truly something here for everyone. Joining me today is another booktuber who I absolutely love collaborating with on this project.
Hello, my name is Chloe Frizzle, and I was so excited when Rebecca Nicole invited me to collaborate on this project because I love reading fantasy and also I love gathering data, so this is the perfect project to combine all of that.
And for all the nerds in the audience who want to know how we gather this data, we asked on both of our community tabs as well as in all the discords that we are in for people to submit nominations of the books that they believe should be on the top fantasy book list of the 21st century. Through this, we received 194 nominations. We organized these nominations by the books that received the most nominations, and if there were any ties, we used the average rating on Goodreads as the tiebreaker. Of course, we did receive several authors who had multiple nominations across multiple books, and we decided to include only one book by each author on our list of top 50 books. So we chose the book that had the most nominations, but that means we do have several authors that we removed their books from the list, and those are the honorable mentions, which I will get into here. First, we have Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norwell by Susanna Clarke, Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson, Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson, Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson, Aeronauts Windless by Jim Butcher, and A Brightness Long Ago by Guy Gavriel Kay. All of these books would have made our list, but since we were only including one book by the author, a different book by that author made our list. And with that, let's get into the best list of the top 50 fantasy books of the 21st century. Coming in at number 50 on this list is Babel by R.F. Kuang. This is a dark academia historical fantasy. This follows the story of this young boy who is orphaned in Canton, China, and is discovered by this mysterious professor who takes him away to England to study Latin and Greek and English and maintain his Mandarin Chinese skills so that he is able to join this prestigious language institution called Babel at Oxford University. While our protagonist still maintains this mysterious relationship with this professor, he also starts to realize that him and his fellow students in Babel are being exploited for their language skills. This story deals with a lot of themes of language and translation, particularly colonization through language and translation, as well as student revolutions and if and when violence is ever appropriate. When we were gathering the nominations for this list, we also asked people the reasons they were nominating this book, and this is one of the reasons this book was nominated. This is the first book that ever made me cry.
Rank number 49 goes to Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. And this book is pitched like, what if the works of Jane Austen met military steampunk fantasy, where our gentlewoman protagonist has now been conscripted into this war and finds a larger part to play in it. This gritty novel deals with both the politics of war and the friendships and familial relationships that get entangled with it, and it's often praised for its deep, well-rounded characters. I haven't read this one yet, but it's definitely going on my TBR. Next up, rank 48, is a book that I've read, which is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. This book starts in 1714 with our protagonist making a deal with the devil. She gets to live forever with ultimate freedom. The catch is that no one ever remembers her. As soon as she leaves someone's sight, they've forgotten everything about her. And then we follow Addie mostly in modern day New York as she's struggling with deep loneliness through this. And then everything changes when she finds a guy who actually remembers her. And this book is definitely a slow character study of both Addie and this man that she finds that remembers her, and how their stories intertwine and how they're both exploring what it means to leave a mark on the world.
Coming in at 47 is The Other Wind by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is the final book in the Earthsea cycle that was published in 2001, so it sneaks its way onto this list of best books of the 21st century. This is the 6th book in the Earthsea cycle, and throughout these books we really get to see the characters grow up. I've heard that the books mature a lot, where the first 3 are following young protagonists and the last 3 are following middle-aged protagonists. So as not to spoil anyone, I will be talking about the plot of the first book instead of the final book. So in A Wizard of Earthsea, we follow this young protagonist as he enters this magical school. And in his quest for power and his arrogance, he decides to perform a spell that he is not yet ready for, and he unleashes this evil spirit into the world. This evil spirit is attached to him and following him around, trying to consume him. He has to figure out how to correct his mistakes and face his past so that way he can rid himself of this evil spirit. While not all the books follow this protagonist does appear in all of the other Earthsea cycle books. Coming in at number 46 is The Priory of the Orange Tree. This is a standalone political fantasy where we follow 4 characters who are living in different parts of the world, in different nations, and different cultures. All of these cultures are fleshed out and expanded on. We have cultures that have fought off dragons, and they try to keep dragons off their land. They also frown upon anything magical. And we also have other cultures that revere dragons and are very into magical elements of the world. There is an ancient power rising to conquer all of these nations, and these characters will have to overcome their differences and work together in order to defeat this ancient power. I think the tagline for this book sums it up really well. A world divided, a queendom without an heir, an ancient enemy awakens.
Rank 45 goes to the Locked Tomb series, the first of which is Gideon the Ninth. This is one of the weirdest books I've ever read. It's a mashup of both fantasy, sci-fi, and murder mystery. Our protagonist, Gideon, is a swordswoman, and she is a slave to the family of Harrow, who is a powerful necromancer. And they both go off on a intergalactic quest to compete in a competition for the favor of the Emperor and maybe immortality that quickly turns into a murder mystery puzzle box escape room plot. This is one of those books where you're going to be a little confused about the plot along the ride, but the fun of this book is the ride because the humor is top-notch with equal parts beautiful wit and prose and irony and slapstick comedy all smushed together with a nice side of lesbian enemies to lovers romance.
Coming in at 44 is Bonesmith by Nicki Preto. In this book, we follow a protagonist who wants to become a ghost-fighting warrior, but instead she is banished to guard the border wall against the unchecked undead who are trying to come in and take over. However, she is unwilling to accept this as her fate, so whenever she hears the prince is kidnapped and taken beyond the wall, she sees this as her chance to prove herself. So she is determined to rescue the prince, but when she does so, she has to make an uneasy alliance with the kidnappers in order to travel to safety. And there might be some enemies to lovers as she's figuring out what the kidnappers' motivations are. This is a dark, haunting YA fantasy where our characters have to remember that the real enemy is not each other, but the undead.
Rank 43 is The Girl from the Other Side by Nagabe. This is a fantasy horror manga. And let me just read you the blurb because it's beautiful. In a land far away, there were 2 kingdoms. The outside, where twisted beasts roamed and could curse with a touch, and the inside, where humans lived in safety and peace. The girl and the beast should never have met, but when they do, a quiet fairy tale begins. And with this, I want to say something about this list in general and how cool it is, because we surveyed hundreds of people to make this list. However, we did not survey thousands of people, and I'm sure if we kept asking more and more people, what is your favorite fantasy book? Then this list would have become the top 50 most popular fantasy books pretty quick. And don't worry, there are going to be plenty of popular books still on this list, right? But because we only surveyed hundreds of people, we've somewhat underfit the data. So instead of just making a list of the most popular fantasy books, we have room here for these little books that I've never heard of. We have room for these books that are people's personal favorites, even if they haven't achieved great fame and bestseller success yet. And that's something that I really love about this list, is that we have room to spotlight these hidden gems. And I hope it's something that you can love about this list too, that you can find books that you've never heard of and yet people love. Like, for example, rank 42, Akarnae by Lynette Noni. Dreading her first day at a new school, Alex is stunned when she walks through a doorway and finds herself stranded in Medora, a fantasy world full of impossibilities. So this is a young adult portal fantasy magical school setting adventure book, and doesn't that just sound like such a treat? An unwilling pawn in a deadly game, Alex's shoulders bear the crushing weight of an entire race's survival. Only she can save the Medorans, but what if doing so prevents her from ever returning home?
Coming in at number 41 is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. This is a well-paced, Norse-inspired adult fantasy world with excellent exploration of characters. A new world is rising, where power-hungry jarls feud and monsters stalk the woods and mountains. A world where the bones of the dead gods still hold great power for those brave or desperate enough to seek them out. Now whispers of war echo across the mountains and fjords. Fate follows in the footsteps of three people: a huntress on a dangerous quest, a noblewoman who has rejected privilege in pursuit of battle fame, and a thrall who seeks vengeance among the famed mercenaries known as the Bloodsorn. All three will shape the fate of the world as it once more falls under the shadow of the gods. Coming in at number 40 on this list is The Protector of the Small series. The first book published after the turn of the century is Page, which is the second book in the series. But again, in order to avoid spoilers, I will be talking about the first book in the series called The First Test. This is set in the same world as the Elena the Lioness series by Tamora Pierce, but in this book, the rules have changed and women are allowed to become knights. And our protagonist in this book is the first woman to be a squire and to try to train for knighthood. The reason she wants to do this is not necessarily because she wants to fight, but because she wants to protect the vulnerable. She wants to protect those who are unable to protect themselves, and she is good at befriending animals and having those companions, and she wants to protect them by learning to be a knight.
Rank 39 is the Chronicles of the Black Company series by Glen Cook, particularly the last book in the series, Soldiers Live, which is the only book in the series published in the 2000s, so it just got in by the skin of its teeth. Here's the blurb for the first book in the series, so I don't spoil myself for the series or any of you, okay? Some feel the lady, newly risen from centuries in thrall, stands between humankind and evil. Some feel she is evil itself. And I just love how this list has room for both the fantasy that was popular a few decades ago and the fantasy that's popular now.
And coming in at rank 38 on this list is We Free Men by Terry Pratchett. In the nomination, someone said that this deals with the loss of a grandparent in a very empathetic and beautiful way. And honestly, I think reading from the description of this book is the best way to encapsulate what this book is. Armed with only her frying pan and her common sense, young witch-to-be Tiffany Aching must defend her home against the monsters of fairyland. Luckily, she has some very unusual help. The local Nak Mac Feagle, aka We Free Men, a clan of fierce, sheep-stealing, sword-wielding, 6-inch-high blue men. Together, they must face the Headless Horseman, ferocious Grimhounds, terrifying dreams come true, and ultimately the sinister Queen of Elves herself.
Rank 37 goes to a children's graphic novel, Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulsen, which sounds like the cutest thing ever. But when her village of vegetable folk learns that a bloodthirsty vampire has moved into the nearby castle, they all agree that, in spite of her fear and self-doubt, Garlic is the obvious choice to confront him. After all, Garlic drives away vampires, right?
At number 36 is Rage of Dragons by Evan Winters. This is a book set in a place of non-stop war, and very few people are born with magical abilities that they are able to use in this war. But our main character is not one of those, and he is one of the expendable crewmen, and he's just trying to make it through life so he can settle down and raise his family without getting killed in this war. But those closest to him are brutally murdered, and he decides to set out on a quest to avenge their murders. This book was nominated with the comment, "Nonstop action with set fire to the world consequences."
Rank 35 is the Morrigan Crow series that starts with Nevermoor by Jessica Townsend. Now, of course, with fantasy books for children, the description, it's like Harry Potter, but maybe even better, gets tossed around quite a bit. But this is the only book I've ever read that I feel like really deserves that moniker. Our protagonist, Morrigan Crow, is a little girl who has a bad lot in life. She is blamed for all of the misfortunes in her town because she is cursed. And then she is rescued from this life by a magical man who takes her to a magical society where people accept her for who she is. But there's a catch. She has to get in to the magical, wondrous society through completing a series of high-stakes trials. Rank 34 is Legendborn by Tracy Deonn. This is a young adult urban fantasy with magic steeped in the Knights of the Round Table and legends of King Arthur and Merlin. We are following a teenage girl named Bree, and at the beginning of this book, she has recently lost her mother. And kind of steeped in all of that grief, she runs away to college. And there she discovers the secret society of the Legendborn, which she starts to investigate and starts to join because not only is she intrigued at why are there all this magic and demons, but also she finds clues that they might be connected with her mother's death. Truly a brilliant book in that way, and I was not surprised to see it here on this list.
At rank number 33 is The Tea Dragon Society by Kay O'Neill. This sounds like an absolutely adorable, middle grade, cozy fantasy graphic novel. After discovering a lost tea dragon in the marketplace, Greta learns about the dying art form of tea dragon caretaking from the kind tea shop owners. As she befriends them and their shy ward, Lynette, Greta sees how the craft enriches their lives, and eventually her own. At rank number 32, we have A Fire Endless, which is the second book in the Elements of Cadence series by Rebecca Ross. In order to avoid spoilers, I will only be talking about the first book in this duology. In the first book, we are transported to this world where this island is ruled by mischievous spirits who like to play with the humans who live there. But some of these humans are starting to disappear, and the spirits will only respond to humans when humans play them songs. Our main character is a bard who is on the mission to get these spirits to return the missing humans. And our main character teams up with a childhood rival on this quest. And together they discover there might be more sinister spirits at play here, as well as their budding feelings for each other.
Rank 31 is The Rarkin's Familiar by Nicki Lee. And if you're looking for the hidden gem, this is the book on this list with the least amount of readers. And yes, it did probably get its spot on this list because it's one of my personal favorites and I've yapped about it on my channel. Now I get to talk about it here on Rebecca Nicole's. This is a young adult epic fantasy novel where we are following a girl who is set on avenging the death of her father. And along the way, she accidentally gets into somewhat of a demonic pact with this birdman creature. And this pact has gone so wrong that it is slowly eroding her sanity. And so her and the Rarkin, this birdman, have to go on a quest together to try to find someone with the magical skill to unbind them. I love this book. It is brilliant, from the action to the way that it characterizes its villains to the friendship and interesting dynamics of our leads. It's so good. Please go pick it up.
Coming in at number 30 on this list is Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, which I feel like just represents how much this book has had an impact on the fantasy genre. In this book, we are following a protagonist who is pressured into going to this elite war college where they have to go through a series of brutal tests in order to decide who gets to bond with the dragons, because only the strongest among them can bond with dragons. This creates a very tense environment that is win or die, with your fellow classmates possibly out to stab you in the back. Our protagonist has to balance these challenges with her growing feelings for one of her fellow cadets.
Rank 29 is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. This book is following a teenage girl at a magic school with a few catches. The first catch is that she has an affinity for dark magic and is kind of prophesied to become the destroyer / dark lord. But she's trying to make that future not happen the best she can. The second catch is that this school is deadly. It is infested with monsters, and there is not a teacher or supervisor in sight. It's just a bunch of teenagers struggling to learn and survive. A lot of the plot is revolving around her struggling to make friends because she's been shunned all of her life as this dark wizard, and she's trying to break out of that mold, but it's difficult because she's not always the nicest.
At number 28, we have The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This book is known for being enchanting and lyrical and atmospheric. We have two characters who are destined to compete in this magical competition, and the venue for the competition is the Night Circus. This is a circus that pops up one day with no advertising and is gone the next. You never know where the circus will pop up. And the magical battles that happen at this circus are illusions. Or are they?
Rank 27 is the Kate Daniels series, starting with Magic Bites. This is an urban fantasy series where we are following a woman who is a mercenary. She's got a little bit of magic of her own, and her day job is mostly hunting down rogue magical beasts. And then over the course of this expansive series, she gets into more and more pickles until her jobs are more saving the world. One of the really cool things about this series is its unique world building, where it's a kind of post-apocalyptic setting, where sometimes magic will work and technology won't. So you can do a spell, but you can't start your car, and then randomly it will flip-flop back and forth, and that creates a really interesting dynamic. Our characters need to master both the magical tools and the technological tools alongside them. I think this also showcases well something else I love about our top 50 list here is that it's so expansive in genres of fantasy. Like, yes, we have the classic high epic fantasy here, but we also have things like this, that's urban fantasy / paranormal romance. We have fantasy on this list for children, and we have fantasy on this list for adults. We have short little graphic novels, and we have huge 1,000+ page chunkers, and everything in between, so there's a recommendation on this list really for everyone, not just the stereotypical fantasy reader.
At number 26, we have American Gods by Neil Gaiman. Days before his release from prison, Shadow's wife Laura dies in a mysterious car crash. Numbly, he makes his way back home. On the plane, he encounters the enigmatic Mr. Wednesday, who claims to be a refugee from a distant war, a former god, and the King of America. Together, they embark on a profoundly strange journey across the heart of the USA. Whilst all around them, a storm of preternatural and epic proportions threatens to break. Scary, gripping, and deeply unsettling, American Gods takes a long, hard look into the soul of America. You'll be surprised by what and who it finds there.
Rank 25 is the Mercy Thompson series that starts with Moon Called. This is an urban fantasy following a woman who is a car mechanic and also a coyote shapeshifter. And because of her big heart, she keeps accidentally getting involved in the dangerous schemes of the local werewolves and vampires and fae. I do want to give the quick disclaimer that though this cover does look very spicy, the contents of the books are much more mild. And one of the real strengths of this book is whether you are in the romance side plots or the action adventure main plots, the core of everything is typically the relationships between characters. The friendships and bonds that are developing and breaking and coming back together again throughout this series. And that's one of the reasons that I really love this series, is that it's full of lovable, believable characters. Rank 24 is the DFZ series by Rachel Aaron. It takes place in a world that is both an urban fantasy and cyberpunk world. So you have your everyday normal human citizens, your dragons, and your cyborgs all mixed together, and everything else you could imagine in that setting. We are following a young woman named Opal, and she is a cleaner in this city. She goes into old abandoned apartments and cleans them out for some quick cash. Sometimes there are some magical curses and weird things left behind in the apartment, but she's pretty good at handling those kind of things. Until she finds something in one of the apartments that is worth a lot of money and gets into a mess with the magical mob, kind of fighting over it, but she desperately needs that money because she is in debt and struggling to make some quick cash to get out of it. These books are so fun and fast-paced and so clever and with a great heart at the center. Rank 23 goes to The World of the Five Gods series by Lois McMaster Bujold, particularly the book The Curse of Chalion. This book is following a man who was a slave for a few decades. It was real rough, he escaped, and now he's coming back to his childhood home, which happens to be a castle. He's welcomed back into the castle and quickly given a job, which is to be the secretary to the princess. And this pulls him back into the world of court politics and intrigue that he was hoping to leave behind him, and also pulls him into the mysterious curse that has fallen over the royal family.
Coming in at number 22 is The Wheel of Time, specifically A Memory of Light, which is the last book in this 14-book fantasy saga. This is truly an epic adventure over thousands and thousands of pages. We follow 5 characters as they leave their small mountain town, and they go out into the world for the first time and meet many different creatures and people and cultures along the way, since one of them is prophesied to stand against the Dark One. But this person has the power to both save the world and break the world.
Rank 21 is Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. The dream chooses the dreamer, not the other way around. And Laszlo Strange, war orphan and junior librarian, has always feared that his dream chose poorly. What this book is most often praised for is its lush, intricate, wondrous, perfection writing style.
At number 20, we have The Lord of Emperors by Guy Gavriel, which is the second book in the Sarantine Mosaic. Guy Gavriel is known for his beautiful prose, this absolute lush writing, and his wonderful prologues. Crispin is a master mosaicist, creating beautiful art with the colored stones and glass. Summoned to Sarantium by imperial request, he bears a queen's secret mission and a talisman from an alchemist. Once in the fabled city, with its taverns and gilded sanctuaries, chariot races and palaces, intrigues and violence, Crispin must find his own source of power in order to survive, and unexpectedly discovers it high on the scaffolding of his own greatest creation. At number 19, we have one of the most popular Greek mythology retellings, The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. In this book, we follow both Achilles and Patroclus as they are young boys growing up together and forming a very close bond as they learn the skills of war and medicine. Of course, whenever they hear that Helen has been kidnapped, they decide to lay siege on Spartus, and Achilles is going with the promise of glory and reward, and Patroclus joins with both love and fear for his friend.
Rank 18 is The House in the Cerulean Sea by T.J. Klune. And this is definitely the headliner for cozy fantasy on this list. We are following a man who works for a somewhat evil bureaucracy, and his job is to go to magical orphanages to check up on them. He's sent to the House in the Cerulean Sea, which is the orphanage for extra problem children that have extra big magic. And as he settles into this orphanage and really gets to know the people there and let them into his heart, he finds love, both in a romantic sense and a love for these very cute, fun children. Rank 17 goes to The Sword of Guin. This book mainly follows a mother and a son who are from this family that has ice powers. They're from a society that's very traditional, that has very strict gender roles and very strict expectations for the people here, where their society is very militaristic and devoted to defending the empire at all costs. And we're following both the son as he comes to better understand the world around him and understand the flaws in the system that he's a part of, and the mother as she has to confront how those flaws are hurting herself and her family and fight for what she believes in. This is an absolutely beautiful book, and fair warning, it will rip out your heart. Rank 16 is Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. This young adult adventure novel is following 6 protagonists as they form an unlikely crew to go on an impossible heist. And one of the things that I loved about this book is the interpersonal relationships between all of them. We have friendships, we have romantic relationships, we have rivalries, and it's so fun to watch all of them get along and not get along as they go on this high-stakes adventure.
Coming in at rank number 15 is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. This is a book told in narrative. It's where our main character is telling his life story, and he's talking about how he went from an orphan boy on the streets to attending a magical school to becoming a fugitive after murdering the king. And he tells you the end of his story up front and then goes back to the beginning and tells you how it all happened. Coming in at rank number 14 is The Will of the Many by James Islington. This is a fun, fast-paced adventure following this boy who is obviously hiding something about his past and living in an orphanage, and he gets reached out to by a senator, and the senator blackmails him into attending this really prestigious academy where when he graduates, he will join the elite ranking government officials. But there are factions within this government, and our senator sends him to the academy to solve the mystery of why students keep ending up dead at this academy. On top of that, he is also trying to be recruited by a rebel faction, and he's not sure which side he wants to land on. But he does know in order to survive, he has to work his way up in the academy rankings. Coming in at number 13 is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is a beautiful, lyrical, atmospheric tale of this family living in the Russian wilderness. And they honor the house spirits in order to keep the evil forest spirits at bay. But whenever our protagonist's mother dies and her father remarries someone from outside the village who forbids anyone in the house from honoring the house spirits, evil spirits from the forest draw ever closer.
Rank 12 is the first law series by Joe Abercrombie, which starts with The Blade itself. And this book is often held up as like the pinnacle of the fantasy grim dark genre. So what does that mean? As the blurb puts it, the line between hero and villain is sharp enough to draw blood. Everything is shades of gray. You are following oftentimes villainous characters, and things get grim and dark in these books, where it's powerfully character focused, where you really get to get into the protagonists' heads and understand them on a deep level. Rank 11 is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, which is, I think, the only book that we have overlapped with the New York Times Best Books of the Century list. And I think that demonstrates something really neat about this book, is that it appeals to fantasy readers who read this genre fiction and to more literary fiction readers that were compiling this New York Times list. In this world, there are people born with the power to control earthquakes, which is really great because this world needs that, because it's very earthquake prone and has lots of apocalypses and disasters because of it. This is a story following 3 women who have this power, how they both find themselves in their independence and power, and how they are systematically oppressed by this empire because the empire doesn't want these magic people getting any ideas.
And at number 10, we have Harry Potter, which is such a cultural phenomenon and one of the ways a lot of people got into reading, and particularly reading fantasy books. Of course, this is about a young boy who is orphaned and living with his unloving aunt and uncle, who discovers that he's actually from a magical family and there's this entire magical world that he did not even know existed. But he gets whisked away to this magical world where he discovers wonder and excitement and has a special role to play.
Rank 9 is Perdido Street Station by China Mieville. This is a wonderfully weird fantasy book that straddles both urban fantasy and steampunk and horror elements. I've heard this book described as a novel that is trying to challenge you in a bunch of different interesting ways. So if that sounds appealing to you, go pick it up. Because obviously, lots of people have loved it.
At rank number 8, we have The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch. And for one of the reasons this book was nominated, we have great friendships and amazing thief shenanigans, which is basically all that I know about this book. I have heard that it is great on the friendship side of things. Some people's favorite book friendships are from this book. And the description says, young Locke dodges death and slavery and becomes a thief under the tutelage of a gifted con artist. But of course, there are those that lurk in the shadows and things that threaten this group of thieves. At number 7, we have Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. Everything I've heard about this book makes it sound really interesting. It's supposed to have really in-depth characters and really in-depth world, but it plops you in and does not hold your hand or explain much and expects you to pick things up along the way. I think the description that someone submitted as their reason for nominating this sounds amazing and makes it sound even more appealing. It's some of the most proficient writing and incredible world building I've ever experienced. The character depth is unbelievable and the tragedy is impactful and heartbreaking. Love everything about this book. Epic battle scenes, twists, and all the emotions.
Rank 6 is the Dresden Files series, which starts with Stormfront. And I gotta level with you, this is one of my favorite series of all time, and I'm so excited that it made it onto this list. So this is an urban fantasy following a wizard in modern day Chicago. He is a detective, and the kinds of cases he's solving in these books, sometimes by himself and sometimes hand in hand with the police, is things like a wizard murdered some people, or the local werewolf pact is causing trouble, or there's an apocalypse of ghosts brewing. I love every single book in this series, but one of the real strengths is how they all build on each other, where every single book you get a little bit more of world building until in the later books in the series, everything has come together to a big epic scope, where it's really world-ending stakes and everything feels so earned and well foundationed.
At number 5 is The Spear Cuts Through Water by Simon Jimenez. This is one of the most unique stories I have ever read, and I am super excited that it made this list. This is a story told in first, second, and third person. It begins by telling you a story told to you by your Lola, and I was listening to the audiobook for this one, and it really felt like I was listening to a story my Lola was telling me. It is beautifully written. It really transports you to the story. And there was like a quote on every page that I was just like, wow, that was such a great way of saying that. It was absolutely beautiful writing. So this is the story of these two characters who are transporting this god as they go on this 5-day long journey. They're looking for freedom and discovering a lot about themselves and their identity as they are trying to end the reign of these 3 terrors. There's also these smelly talking tortoises who can see the future and usually have quips that they tell people along the way, which just makes the story entertaining. At rank number 4, we have A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. This series and its adaptation, Game of Thrones, took the world by storm. And I think part of the reason this series works so well for so many people, aside from the fact that we have an interesting plot with close character examinations where we see characters, good and bad, from very different points of views, and we get to understand their motivations and really dive deep into that. We also have intricate foreshadowing in this series woven throughout that you can go back and see that These threads were planted there all along. But aside from all that, while this story is primarily a political drama, there's something here for everyone. There is romance, there is court drama, there are battles, there is magic and dragons. There's something in this series for everyone.
Rank 3 goes to Piranesi by Susanna Clarke. So I binged it in a day, and then the next day I binged it again. Piranesi, I'm newly obsessed with it. This book follows a man who lives in a seemingly infinite labyrinth of a house. It has marble statues and birds and oceans in the basement. And he's on a quest to catalog every statue in the place. And this is definitely a weird book where along the way you get to uncover the mystery of what's going on in this labyrinth, but let me give you a few little tidbits. Our narrator confidently declares that there have only been 15 people existing in the world. Him, the one other person trapped in the labyrinth with him, and the 13 skeletons that are in the house. He has his journals that he has been dutifully keeping for years. It starts 7 years ago with 2011, and present him has no idea what the year 2011 means.
At number 2, we have The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. And I will fully admit, if this was a list of my personal favorites, Robin Hobb would be at number 1. She is the writer that has made me feel more than any other writer. Her character development, descriptions, deep dives. Her books are all about character and also about the emotion, everything that they go through. And they go through a lot. Some of it their own doing. Some of it not, but some of it they bring upon themselves. The Realm of the Elderlings is a long series that follows 2 different casts of characters. We have the Fitz books, which focuses on Fitz Chivalry Farseer, who we get to see grow up from the time that he is 5 years old, and he is growing up in the castle as a bastard son of one of the princes. And we get to see him grow up there. And then throughout the series, we also get to see him grow old. Then we have The Crew of the Liveship Traders, which is a multi-POV book where we are following multiple characters and really this family drama. I absolutely love these books, and I'm not even finished the series yet, but I think they are some of the best fantasy books I have ever read.
Rank 1, the best fantasy book of our century. You've probably already guessed what it's going to be. It goes to the Stormlight Archive series by Brandon Sanderson, which starts with The Way of Kings. But how do I explain this book? Let's say it has many complicated plot lines, but it's always clear and easy to understand what's going on. It has a large cast with lots of characters, but they're characterized so well that it's easy to fall in love with them and keep track of them. It has epic plots that, though they are stretched over thousands of pages, never feel like they drag because they're just so well paced and exciting. One of those plot lines that we're following in book 1 is with a man who is a slave. He's tasked with doing dangerous, hard labor for this army, fighting a war that no one really understands or super cares about. Along the way in the story, he's struggling with depression and finding a reason to keep going, which he eventually does find in the crew around him of fellow slaves as he leads them and binds them together, and as he finds his magic powers and new ways to resist and fight because of it. And that is just one of many awesome plot lines that you will find in the Stormlight Archive series, an honest masterpiece.
And thus concludes our list of the best fantasy books of the 21st century. Be sure to check out Chloe's channel and let us know what you think of our list in the comments.